It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and my friends and I were hanging out at a local coffee shop, sipping on iced lattes and sharing stories. Laughter filled the air as we relaxed in the warmth of the camaraderie, enjoying the simple pleasures of the weekend. Little did we know that our seemingly ordinary afternoon would unravel into a perplexing journey through the enigmatic corridors of the digital realm. As we bantered and laughed, the conversation took an unexpected turn when someone brought up the latest Snapchat craze, a mysterious user known as the Vanisher. Whispers of this digital enigma had reached our ears, with rumors suggesting that adding the Vanisher would lead to a particular chat experience, one that left participants with an unsettling sense of disquiet. Intrigued by our allure of the unknown, curiosity got the better of us. With a mix of excitement and apprehension, we collectively decided to add the Vanisher to our Snapchat friends list. Almost immediately, a chat window materialized on our screens, and the messages within were cryptic, filled with strange symbols and emojis that seemed to convey a message beyond our understanding. As we delved deeper into this conversation, the chat took an eerie turn. The messages, once abstract, became to display an uncanny knowledge of our lives, personal details that we hadn't shared on social media or anyone else. It was as if the Vanisher had unfettered access to a hidden trove of information about each one of us, leaving with a disconcerting sense of vulnerability. The once light-hearted atmosphere in the coffee shop shifted, morphing into a playful banter to uneasy contemplation. Nervous glances were exchanged among us as we questioned whether one of our own was behind this elaborate prank. However, as the messages continued to flow, it became evident that this was something beyond our control. An inexplicable intrusion into the sanity of our digital lives. The Vanisher's messages took an unsettling turn, describing our surroundings with an accuracy that sent shivers down our spines. It detailed the color of the coffee shop walls, the intricate pattern of the barista's apron, and even the tiles of the books neatly arranged on the shelves. Panic set as we all grappled with the disconcerting realization that we were being watched, although the source of this information remained elusive. In a desperate attempt to unravel the mystery, we mustered the courage to ask the Vanisher who they were and what they wanted. The response was chilling. A barrage of images and videos that depicted moments of their own lives. Birthday family gatherings, and even private moments were laid bare in front of us. The Vanisher had transformed into an omniscient observer, peering into the most intimate corners of our existence. Fearful and desperate for answers, we collectively decided to take matters into our own hands. The unanimous decision was to delete the Vanisher from our Snapchat contacts, hoping that the digital connection world would put an end to the disconcerting intrusion. Miraculously, the chat disappeared, and the fleeting sense of relief washed over us. However, our respite was short-lived. The next day, as we reconvened at the coffee shop, a sense of foreboding settling upon us. Snap after snap arrived, each one containing real-life images of us, captured without our knowledge. The Vanisher had transcended the confines of the digital realm, infiltrating our lives to an unsettling degree. The boundary between the virtual and the tangible had blurred into an unsettling amalgamation of both, leaving us in a state of perpetual disarray. Determined to break free from the Vanisher's relentless grip, we sought advice from tech experts and cybersecurity specialists. Despite our collective efforts, the mysterious entity continued to haunt us through Snapchat, predicting our every move and wavering a surreal, disconcerting narrative around our lives. As days turned into weeks, the once thriving group of friends found themselves ensnared into a constant state of paranoia. The Vanisher had become an ever-present specter, a digital ghost that defied all attempts of exorcism. Our collective attempts to escape its influence only fueled its persistence, leaving us grappling with an insidious force that seemed to be impervious to reason. Eventually, faced with an unsettling reality of our digital entrapment, we made the difficult decision to abandon our Snapchat accounts altogether. With trepidation, we deleted the app, hoping that severing our ties with this particular digital platform would liberate us from the Vanisher's relentless gaze. In the days that followed, the snap ceased, and we began our arduous process of rebuilding our lives without the constant surveillance. However, the experience had left a mark on us. We became hyper-aware of our digital presence, questioning the security and privacy of our online interactions. The once distinct line between the virtual and the real had become blurred, and we couldn't shake the feeling that in the vast expanse of the digital landscape, there were entities that transcended the boundaries we once believed to be sacrosanct. Despite our concerted efforts to move on, the unease lingered like a shadow. The absence of the Vanisher snaps did little to quell the underlying fear that our digital lives were still vulnerable to unseen forces. We shared fewer photos, posted sparingly, and even hesitated before sending private messages. The feeling of being constantly observed had etched itself into our collective consciousness. As weeks turned into months, we tentatively rekindled our online presence, cautiously navigating the virtual realm. The specter of the Vanisher had vanished, but the scars remained, a reminder that the digital world held secrets and dangers we were only beginning to understand. In an attempt to gain closure, we revisited the coffee shop where it all began. As we sat around the familiar table, now weathered by time and shared experiences, we recounted the strange saga of the Vanisher. The topic had transformed from a chilling tale to a cautionary fable among us, a narrative that underscored the vulnerability of our digital identities. In the midst of our conversation, a notification pinged on our phones simultaneously. It was a Snapchat notification. A cold shiver ran down our spines. Hesitant glances were exchanged as we reluctantly opened the app. To our surprise, the notification wasn't from the Vanisher, but from an unknown username, the Observer. The chat contained a single message: "You can't escape the digital eye." The full moon loomed high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the quiet town of Blackwood. I had always loved the peacefulness of this place, but tonight there was an unsettling feeling in the air. As I made my way from home to my friend's house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I quickened my pace, my heart racing with every step. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the empty streets. I stopped in my tracks, frozen with fear. I heard stories of strange creatures lurking in the shadows of Blackwood, but I never believed them. That is, until now. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the growl grew louder and closer. I turned around, and my eyes widened in horror. Standing in front of me was a massive wolf, its fur as black as coal and its eyes glowing as fierce yellow in the moonlight. But this was no ordinary wolf. It stood on two legs, and its front paws resembling human hands, and its mouth was filled with long, sharp teeth. I stumbled backwards, trying to find strength to run. But before I could even take a step, the creature let out a blood-curdling howl, and I knew I was no match against it. I closed my eyes and braced for the worst. But instead of pain, I felt a sharp wind rush past me, and I opened my eyes. The creature was gone. I stood there for a moment, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had just happened. Then it hit me. I had just encountered a werewolf. I hurried back home, my mind racing with fear and confusion. As I walked through the door, I nearly collapsed in relief. But as I closed the door behind me, I noticed something strange. My arms were covered in deep scratches, as if I had been in a fight. I looked closer and saw that the scratches were actually in the shape of claw marks. My heart raced as I remembered the creature's claws, and the realization slowly sank in. I had been attacked by a werewolf. But how was this possible? Werewolves were just a myth, right? I sat on my bed, my mind whirring with questions and my heart still pounding my chest. I couldn't sleep that night, every noise sending shivers down my spine. But as the sun began to rise, I finally drifted off into an uneasy sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I thought it had all been a terrifying dream. But the sight of the scratches on my arms and the memories of the creature's howl quickly reminded me that it was all too real. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that there had to be a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew what I was seeing was not of this world. I spent the next few days trying to shake it off, this encounter, but it seemed like everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. I couldn't help but feel like I was being followed by the werewolf. I even started to notice strange behaviors of some of the townspeople, as if they were hiding something. I confided in my friend Rachel about my encounter, hoping she would have some sort of explanation. But instead, she looked at me with fear in her eyes and said, "You saw the Blackwood werewolf?" I was taken aback by her words. Rachel then proceeded to tell me the legend of a werewolf who had roamed the town for years, terrorizing its residents every full moon. The creature was said to have been cursed by a witch and would transform into a bloodthirsty werewolf every month. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was too clear to ignore. Rachel then told me the only way to break the curse was to kill the werewolf with a silver bullet. I couldn't comprehend the thought of killing another living being, even if it was a cursed one. But as the next full moon approached, I knew I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I had to face this creature and put an end to its terror. On the night of the full moon, I armed myself with a silver bullet and headed to the outskirts of the town, where the creature was said to roam. I waited anxiously, my heart in my throat as the moon rose higher in the sky. Suddenly, I heard a familiar growl and the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. I aimed my gun, and as the werewolf emerged from the darkness, I pulled the trigger. The silver bullet struck the creature, and it let out a howl of pain before collapsing to the ground dead. I stood there, shaking in the shock, as if I realized what I've just done. I quickly turned and fled back to safety of my house. The following day, news spread through the town of the death of the Blackwood werewolf. And as the sun set that night, the town seemed to lift the curse that had been plaguing them for years. But for me, the memory of that terrifying encounter and the weight of taking a life will never be forgotten. Every full moon, I couldn't help but wonder if the werewolf's curse had truly been broken, or if there were still more of its kind waiting to hunt down innocent victims like me. I've been a trucker for long as I can remember. Driving long distances on the open road with nothing but the soft hum of my engine to keep me company has always been my idea of freedom. But little did I know that one fateful night would change everything. It was a dark and stormy night, with a heavy rain pounding on my windshield as I drove through a deserted stretch of the highway. I had just made a delivery and was heading back home when I noticed a figure on the side of the road. It was a woman, drenched and shivering in the pouring rain. Without a second thought, I stopped my truck and opened the door, inviting her in. She climbed into the passenger seat, her clothes clinging to her body as she let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said, her voice shaky. "I have been walking for hours and I had no idea where I am." I nodded and offered her a blanket to warm up, as she wrapped it around her. I couldn't help but notice how pale and haggard she looked. Her hair tangled and her eyes were bloodshot, but I brushed it off, thinking she must have been through a rough time. As we continued driving, she told me that she was running away from an abusive relationship and was trying to get her as far away as possible. I felt a pang of sympathy for her and offered to drive her to the nearest truck stop where she could get some rest. But as we drove, she suddenly went quiet. I turned to check on her, and that's when I noticed her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were no longer bloodshot, but black and lifeless. Her face was controlled with a twisted grin, revealing sharp teeth. I slammed on the brakes and my heart racing in panic. "What the hell?" I shouted, not wanting to believe what I was seeing. The woman cackled, her voice now deep and menacing. "You should have not stopped, Tucker. Now you belong to me." I tried to open the door and run, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped in my own truck with this demon. She lunged at me, her claws digging into my skin as she whispered in my ear, "You will be my pawn, my vessel, and together we'll drive for all eternity." In a desperate attempt to escape, I reached out to my pocket knife and sliced her arm. To my horror, the black tar-like liquid oozed instead of blood. But it was enough to startle her, and I managed to push her off me and run out the truck. The rain had slowed down, but the wind was howling as I ran into the darkness. As I looked back, I saw the demon emerge from the truck, her body contorting and morphing into a human form. It let out a spine-chilling roar and began to chase after me. I ran for my life, my heart pounding in my chest as I could feel her breath on my neck. Every step I took felt like I was running in slow motion, the demon gaining on me with every stride. But then I saw the lights in the distance. The truck stopped. With all of my strength, I sprint towards it with my lungs burning and my legs feel like lead. As I reached the safety of the lit area, I could feel the demon's grasp slip away. I collapsed on the ground, catching my breath and thanking whatever forces of nature had saved me. After that night, I quit my job and swore to never drive on that stretch of the highway again. But the memory of the demon still haunts me. It was as if she had marked me as her target, and I could feel her presence everywhere I went. I started to see her in my nightmares, looking around the corners and whispering my name. I would wake up in cold sweats, my heart racing and my body trembling. My once peaceful life had turned into a never-ending nightmare. I tried to seek help, but no one believed my story. They all thought that I was hallucinating or making it up for attention. But I knew the truth. That demon had chosen me and wasn't going to stop until she claimed my soul. And then, one night, she came for me. I was standing outside my house, lost in the thought when I saw her emerge from the shadows. She was just as terrifying as I remembered, her eyes fixed on me as she approached. You belong to me, Taka. It's time to fulfill our eternal contract. She hissed, reaching out to grab me. But then, something miraculous happened. A bold strike of lightning struck her, causing her body to disintegrate into ash. The storm intensified, as if celebrating her demise. I was in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. But then, I saw a figure standing in the distance. A woman with piercing blue eyes, surrounded by a bright golden aura. She walked towards me and put a hand on my shoulder, her voice soft yet commanding. Your soul was marked by a powerful demon, but she underestimated the strength of your will. You have survived and broken her hold on you. Your soul was marked by a powerful demon, but she underestimated the strength of your will. You have survived and broken her hold on you. You are free now. And with that, she disappeared, leaving me in awe with a newfound sense of peace. I never saw the demon again. I would finally live my life without fear. But I will never forget that night. The night I encountered pure evil and managed to get out alive. And to this day, I wonder if that woman who saved me was just a passaway or just something more powerful, watching and protecting us from the darkness. I peered out of my window, watching as the sun slowly set behind the tall trees that lined our quiet street. As the darkness crept in, a shiver ran down my spine. Lately, my once peaceful neighborhood had become a source of fear and unease. It all started about a week ago, when I found a small doll on my doorstep. At first, I thought it was a misplaced toy from one of the neighboring children. But as the days passed, more and more objects appeared on my doorstep. On the second day, it was a wilted flower with a note attached that read, "For you, my dear Fiona." I brushed it off as a strange prank, but when the third day brought a dead bird, my heart began to race with fear. Each day, the objects became creepier and more disturbing, from jar spiders to a rusty knife. I tried to ignore it, hoping that it would stop, but it only got worse. The objects became more frequent, appearing on my doorstep every morning without fail. And then, I started noticing a figure lingering in the shadows of my street, watching me as I went to collect my eerie gifts. I couldn't make it out who it was, but I could feel their eyes burning into me, a sinister presence that sent chills down my spine. I tried to talk to my neighbors and see if anyone else had been experiencing similar incidents, but they all seemed oblivious to what was happening. It was as if I was the only one being targeted. I started to fear leaving my house or even looking out of my window, but I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. One day, I decided to confront whoever was tormenting me. I waited outside my door, determined to catch them in the act. As the clock struck midnight, I heard footsteps approaching. My heart raced with anticipation and fear as I watched the figure approach my doorstep. But to my surprise, it wasn't a stranger or some masked maniac. It was my neighbor, Mr. Benson. I stared at him in shock as he placed a small box on my doorstep and quickly scurried away. I didn't know what to make of it. I had never really spoken to Mr. Benson before, only exchanging polite greetings and small talk. But now, he was acting strange and leaving these bizarre gifts for me. I cautiously opened the mysterious box, half expecting to find something horrifying inside. but instead, it held a delicate porcelain doll, its face twisted into a menacing smile. Fear and confusion overwhelmed me as I realized that Mr. Benson was behind all of this. But why? The next morning, I decided to confront Mr. Benson and get some answers. I went over to his house and knocked on the door. He answered with a smile, but I could see the hint of something sinister in his eyes. I asked him about the gifts and why he was leaving them for me. He chuckled and invited me inside, claiming it was all just a harmless game. But as I stepped into his house, I realized it was anything but harmless. The walls were covered in photos of me, taken from my bedroom window while I was asleep. He had been watching me all this time, studying my every move. My heart pounded in my chest as he led me deeper into his house, showing off his collection of creepy objects, all with my name on them. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Mr. Benson had become obsessed with me, fixating getting my attention at any cost. He explained how he'd always noticed me in the neighborhood, and when he saw me find the first gift, he knew he had to keep going to make the gifts creepier and more aggressive for me to notice him. I filled with disgust and terror as he revealed his twisted plan to win my love. But when he started getting angry, accusing me of not appreciating his gifts and not giving him the attention he deserved, he grabbed my arm tightly, and I knew I had to get out of there before things escalated even further. I managed to break free from his grasp and make a run for the door, but he chased after me, calling my name and begging me to stay. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my ears as I made my way back to the house. I quickly locked all the doors and windows, hoping he wouldn't try to follow me. But the next morning, as I opened the door, I was met with a horrifying sight. My doorstep was covered in blood, and among the red stains were the pieces of my clothes, a lock of my hair, and a note from Mr. Benson proclaiming his love for me and his desire to be with me forever. I couldn't believe this was happening. I called the police and explained everything to them. They seemed Mr. Benson's house and found evidence of his twisted obsession with me. He was arrested and charged with stalking and harassment. But the fear and trauma he had caused me would never fully go away. I moved away from that neighborhood, unable to stomach the thought of living anywhere near Mr. Benson. But even now, I can't erase the memories of his sinister gifts and the terror of knowing I was being watched and targeted by my seemingly harmless neighbor. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest things can come from the people we least expect. It's been another long, uneventful shift at McDonald's. The smell of French fries and burger meat fills the air as I scrub down the counter for the 10th time today. I'm Frank, by the way, a middle-aged man who's been stuck in this dead-end job for far too long. It's not that I mind the work, really. Like right now, for instance. The restaurant is closed for the night, and yet I can swear I hear faint voices coming from the back alley. They sound off. Like they're not coming from human mouths. My skin crawls as I glance at the clock. It's only been an hour since I locked up, but it feels like I've been here for hours. The air is thick with unnatural stillness, and the fluorescent lights flicker ominously. I tell myself it's nothing. That it's just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know something is wrong. Something is waiting for me. I turn my attention back to the counter, wiping down what it feels like a millionth time tonight. As I scrub, I can't help but notice the way the shadows dance along the wall, as if they're trying to form words or images. My heart races as I try to ignore them, focusing instead on the rhythmic sound of my scrub brush against the grimy tile. Just as I'm about to finish up, I hear it. A low, guttural groan coming from the back alley. My heart seizes in my chest, and my breath catches in my throat. I know I should stay put, that I shouldn't go investigate. But curiosity gets the better of me. Slowly, carefully, I make my way through the empty dining area and into the alley. The air is colder out here, and the shadow seems to close in around me like a suffocating blanket. As I peer into the darkness, I swear I see movement at the corner of my eye. "Hello?" I call out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" There is no reply, only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of traffic from the nearby highway. I take a tentative step forward, my footsteps echoing hourly on the concrete. The groan comes again, this time louder and more urgent. I can't shake that feeling that whatever it is not human. And I have a horrible suspicion that it's waiting for me. As I press deeper into the alley, I notice strange symbols etched onto the walls, their meaning lost to time and decay. A chill runs down my spine as I realize they seem to form a map of some sort, leading deeper into the darkness. The groans grow more frantic with each step I take, as if whatever is making them is drawing closer. Finally, I round a corner and find myself face to face with a figure hunched over in the shadows. Its features are obscured by a tattered, hooded cloak, but I can make out the glimmer of unnatural eyes staring back at me. It lets out an agonized groan, and I feel an unsettling mixture of fear and sympathy wash over me. Whatever this thing is, it's in pain. "Who are you?" managed to croak, my voice barely audible over the throbbing of my heart. The figure in cloak cocks its head slightly, as if considering my question. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunges towards me, its arms outstretched and claws bared. I screamed as I feel the icy hands close around my throat, the world spinning out of control. As darkness begins to cloud my vision, I can feel its breath on my ear, whispering words I cannot understand. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the pressure of my throat releases, and I collapse to the ground, gasping for air. When I look up, the figure in cloak is gone, vanished into the shadows once more. I struggle to my feet, still wheezing and coughing, and stumble back into the restaurant. As I lock the door behind me, I can't help but wonder if whatever it was has truly gone, or if it's still out there waiting for its next chance to strike. The rest of the night passes in a blur of disbelief and confusion. I clean up the mess in the alley and looked up as usual, but I can't shake the feeling that something has fundamentally changed. The air seems charged with an electricity I can't quite describe, and the shadow seems to dance and writhe as if they were alive. I try to convince myself that it was a bad dream, or maybe a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. But as I lay awake in bed that night, the memory of those glowing eyes and claws digging into my skin haunt my thoughts. The days turned into weeks, and I continued to work at the restaurant, growing more and more paranoid with each passing hour. I found myself checking the alleyway constantly, peering into the shadows for any sign of movement. I tell myself that it's for the safety of customers, but I know deep down it is because I'm afraid. Afraid for whatever it was will come back for me. The strange symbols in the alley continue to haunt my dreams, their meaning ever elusive. I try to research them online, but every search leads to a dead end. I even consider consulting with a historian or linguist, but something holds me back. I feel as if doing so would be admitting that what happened was real. And I am not quite ready for that yet. I could feel the sun beating down on me as I hiked deeper into the forest. The warmth was welcome after days of cold and rain, but it also meant that I needed to find a sustainable campsite soon. I had been hiking for hours, with nothing but trees and rocks surrounding me. The tall trees towered over me, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Despite the beauty of nature around me, there was an eerie feeling in the air that made me uneasy. I had always been an avid camper, but this solo trip was testing my limits. I wanted to challenge myself and push myself out of my comfort zone. However, I hadn't anticipated the feeling of being completely and utterly alone in the vastness of the forest. As the sun began to set, my unease turned to fear. I quickly made my way towards it, my heart racing in anticipation of finally having a place to rest for the night. I set up my tent and gathered some firewood before starting a small campfire. The crackling of the fire and the warmth it provided eased my nerves a little. I sat down on a log and took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I watched as the fire danced and the shadows it created seemed to take on a life of their own. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of the ridiculous thoughts. It was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I cooked myself a simple meal and ate it quickly, eager to crawl into my sleeping bag and get some rest. But as I settled into my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off as paranoia and exhaustion catching up with me. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but the rustling of the leaves outside and the hooting of an owl kept me awake. I must have drifted off to sleep at some point because I was jolted awake by a loud cracking sound. My heart was pounding in my chest as I reached for my flashlight and unzipped my tent. I stepped out and shined my light towards the sound. My light fell on a large tree that had split in half. I let out a sigh of relief, reminding myself that this was a natural occurrence. I turned to go back to my tent when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I quickly shone the light in that direction, but there was nothing there. I felt the back of my hair stand up and ran a chill down my spine. I brushed it off as my imagination once again and went back inside my tent, forcing myself to fall asleep. The next morning, I decided to explore the surrounding area just a little more before counting on my hike. As I walked deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Every time I turned around, there was no one there. But the feeling persisted, making me uneasy and causing my palms to sweat. Suddenly, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps behind me. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. The footsteps seemed to gain closer and closer, and I began to pick up my pace. I started to run, my heart racing as I tried to shake off the feeling of being followed. I was so focused on getting away that I didn't see the root sticking out of the ground. My foot caught on it, and I fell to the ground, my ankle twisting painfully. I let out a cry in pain and clutched my ankle, trying to ease the throbbing pain. But as I looked up, I saw a figure standing in front of me. It was a tall and dark figure, its features hidden in the shadows of the trees. My heart was pounding my chest as I scrambled to get away. But the figure didn't move. It stood there, watching me. I couldn't make out any definitive features, but I could feel its eyes boring into me. I stumbled to my feet and leapt away as fast as I could, my heart racing in fear. But as I looked back, the figure was gone. My mind was playing tricks on me, I told myself. I quickly made my way to the campsite, my ankle throbbing with pain. I packed up my things and decided to cut my trip short. As I hiked back to my car, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being followed. I constantly looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see the dark figure lurking behind a tree. When I finally reached my car, I let out a sigh of relief. I quickly threw my bag in the trunk and got ready to leave. But as I started my car, a figure appeared in my rearview mirror. It was the same figure that had been following me in the forest. Its features were still hidden, but I could feel its cold stare piercing through me. I stepped on the gas and drove away as fast as I could, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But every time I glanced in my rearview mirror, the figure was still there. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking as I finally reached the end of the road. As I drove back home, I couldn't get the image of the figure out of my mind. Who or what was it? Was it just my imagination, or was there truly something lurking in the forest? I shuddered at the thought, and vowed to never go camping alone again. The cold, sterile walls of the hospital seemed to close in on me as I made my way down to the long, empty hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the plain, illuminated floor. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, despite being the only one in the building. I had been working in this hospital for years, but today was different. Today, the air felt heavy, and there was an uneasiness that made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but as I continued my rounds, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. I reached the end of the hallway and knocked on the door of the last patient's room. There was no response, so I cautiously opened the door. The room was dark, the only source of light coming from the small window by the bed. I stepped inside, checking the chart of the patient's name. My heart dropped when I realized that this was the room of the patient who had died last night. But that was impossible. The nurse had checked on him before her shift ended, and he was still alive. I shook my head, trying to rationalize it as a mix-up in the paperwork. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. As I made my way to the nurse station, I couldn't but feel like I was being followed. Every time I turned, there was no one there. I started to question my own sanity when I heard a noise coming from one of the empty patient rooms. I slowly approached the door and pushed it open. The room was dimly lit, and I couldn't make out a figure sitting in the corner. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. The figure remained still, almost if they were waiting for me. I stepped closer, and my heart raced when I saw that it was the patient who had died hours ago. His eyes wide open, but they were blank and lifeless. I stumbled back, my mind racing. This was impossible. I had just seen his body in the morgue. But he was sitting in front of me. I turned to run, but the door seemingly slammed shut, trapping me inside the room. "Help!" I screamed, banging on the door. But no one came. I was all alone with the dead man. I could feel his empty gaze following me as I frantically searched for a way out. I was about to give up when I noticed a small window on the opposite wall. I quickly climbed onto the bed and managed to pry it open. I jumped out of the window and ran as fast as I could, not looking back until I was safely outside of the hospital. The fresh air filled my lungs, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But my mind was still racing with events that just unfolded. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something supernatural was at play in the hospital. I heard rumors of being built on the ancient burial ground, but I always dismissed it as that, rumors. But now, I wasn't so sure. I decided to do some research on the hospital's history, and what I found sent chills down my spine. It turns out, the hospital was built on the site of an old asylum that was shut due to the reports of strange occurrences and unexplained deaths. The site had been abandoned for decades before the hospital was built on top of it. I couldn't believe that I had been working on such a place for the past few years, completely unaware of its dark past. But I knew I had to go back and find some answers. I couldn't let the memory of that dead patient haunt me forever. The next day, I returned to the hospital armed with my findings. But as soon as I stepped inside, I could feel the heavy air closing in on me once again. I tried to push off my fear aside and headed straight to the nurse's station. But when I got there, it was empty. It was as if the entire hospital staff had disappeared overnight. I cautiously made my way to the patient's room, only to find that it was now a storage closet. The room number remained the same, but everything else had changed. Disheartened, I made my way to the morgue, hoping to find some evidence of what I experienced the night before. To my shock, the body of the patient had seemed now missing from the drawer. In its place, there was a note that read, "You shouldn't have come back." It was then that I heard a voice behind me. "You're not supposed to be here," a raspy voice hissed. I turned to see an old man leaning against the wall, his eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean? What is going on?" I demanded, my heart pounding on my chest. He took a deep, shaky breath and began to tell me the story of the old asylum. He had been a nurse there when it was still in operation, and he had witnessed the horrors that occurred within the walls. People were examined on, tortured, and even killed in the name of science. But the worst part was that the building itself was cursed. The spirits of the patients who died there never left, and their anger and suffering kept them bound to the very place they had suffered. After hearing his story, I knew I had to leave. But as I turned to run, I saw them. The patients, with their hollow eyes and twist expressions, were all around me, their ghostly figures slowly closing in. I could feel the pain and anger, and I knew they won't let me leave. Trapped in that cursed hospital, I realized that I was another victim of its dark past. And as the spirits closed into me, I knew that I would be trapped there forever, never to escape the horrors of the creepy hospital. I had been chatting with Blake on Reddit for weeks. We had bonded together our love of hiking and outdoor adventures. When he asked me out on a date, I was thrilled. I couldn't wait to finally meet him in person. We decided to meet at a small cafe in the city. As I walked towards the cafe, my heart was racing with excitement and nervousness. I took a deep breath and pushed the door. I immediately spotted Blake sitting at the small table. His face lit up as he saw me. He stood up and walked towards me, offering me a warm hug. His presence immediately put me at ease. "Hi, Ashley. It's so great to finally meet you," he said with a smile. "Hi, Blake. It's finally to meet you too," I replied, feeling my cheeks flushed with a hint of excitement. We sat down and ordered our drinks, talking and laughing like we had known each other for years. As we chatted, I couldn't help but notice how handsome Blake was. His jet black hair was perfectly styled, and his deep blue eyes were mesmerizing. As the evening went on, I found myself falling for Blake. He was charming, funny, and had a passion for life that was contagious. I couldn't believe that we only just met. It felt like we had known each other for a lifetime. Before we knew it, it was time to leave the cafe. Blake offered to walk me to my car, and I happily accepted it. As we strolled down the bursting streets, I couldn't help but feel a connection with him. "Hey, do you want to take a walk in the park nearby?" Blake asked, pointing towards a park that was just a block away. "Sure, that sounds lovely," I replied, smiling. We walked through the park, enjoying the warm night air and the sound of crickets chirping. As we walked, I noticed that there weren't many people around. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was because it was the weeknight. Blake grabbed my hand and pulled me towards a secluded area of the park. I felt a panic arise within me. "Blake? What's going on?" "I'm sorry, Ashley. I have to do this." Before I could react, Blake pushed me into the nearby van. I screamed and tried to fight back, but he was too strong. He quickly tied my hands and feet with ropes, gagging me with a cloth. As the van drove off, I had no idea where he was taking me. Panic and fear were consuming me, and I couldn't believe what was happening. The man I thought was my perfect match was now my kidnapper. I lost track of time as I had taken to a remote cabin in the mountains. I was only kept in a room with no windows, and Blake would only show up to bring me meals and water. He refused to tell me why he had taken me or what he wanted from me. I spent my days trying to come up with a plan to escape, but each time I tried, I was caught and punished. Blake had become a completely different person from the man I had met on Reddit. He was controlling, aggressive, and had a darkness in his eyes that terrified me. One day, while Blake was out getting supplies, I managed to free my hands from the ropes. I searched the room for anything that could help me escape. I found a rusty pair of scissors and a piece of metal that I used to pick the lock on the door. I cautiously made my way out of the room, my heart pounding with adrenaline. I crept towards the front door, trying to make as little noise as possible. Just as I was opening the door, I heard Blake's voice behind me. "Where do you think you're going, Ashley?" he sneered. I turned around to see him standing in the doorway, a menacing look on his face. I knew I had to act fast. With all the strength I could muster, I lunged towards him and managed to push him out of the way. I ran as fast as I could towards the woods, not looking back. I could hear Blake's angry shouts behind me as I ran deeper in the woods. I stumbled upon a nearby stream and quickly waded through it to camouflage my scent. I kept running, my feet feeling like they were going to give out at any moment. As I ran, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw Blake chasing after me, fueled by anger and desperation. I ran faster, knowing that my only chance of survival was to escape him. I didn't stop until I came across a clearing. I looked around frantically, trying to find a place to hide. That's when I saw a small cave hidden behind a cluster of rocks. It was my only chance. I quickly made my way towards the cave, ducking behind the rocks to avoid being seen by Blake. As I entered the cave and turned to block the entrance with rocks, I heard Blake's voice on the other side. "Come on, Ashley. There is no point in hiding," he said in a menacing tone. But I didn't move. I waited until I was sure Blake had given up. And then I carefully made my way out of the cave. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, so I started walking towards the nearest town, hoping to find help. After hours of walking, I finally came across a gas station. I went inside and asked to use the phone to call the police. As I was waiting for them to arrive, I couldn't stop shaking and crying. I was grateful to be alive, but I couldn't shake off the memories of being kidnapped by someone I trusted. The police arrived, and I told them everything that had happened. They searched the area and eventually found the remote cabin in the mountains. Blake was arrested and charged with kidnapping and assault. Although my first day with Blake had turned into a terrifying nightmare, I was grateful for the strength and resilience I had found within myself. I realized that I could handle anything that came my way, and I would never let anyone take away my freedom again. After that experience, I had a newfound appreciation for Reddit and the dangerous side of online dating. I promised to myself to always be cautious and never let my guard down like I had with Blake. But most importantly, I promised myself to never let anyone take away my sense of self and my ability to fight for my life.